on the walls. So there'll be an opportunity for people to see that as we go forward. So I'll be keeping everybody informed about that. I'll be communicating with all of the faculty members on all the various campuses, as well as there'll be notices going out from Viewpoint to Viewpoint members and students and up on our website. Secondly, I'm already getting ready for next year's show, which will be in April of 2021. And that show, the call for entries is going to go out hopefully around the 1st of October, and the entry will open on October 15th. The theme for that show is Photographing in 2020, Light and Dark Times. And I'll just read you a little paragraph so that you get a sense of what it's about. As a photographer, explore what this year means to you, your family, friends, your school, work, and environment. Are there both light and dark times? What is happening in your world that supports you and gives you hope? We are living in a period of dramatic shifts, great uncertainty, and at times unrelenting pressure in our everyday lives. We see horrific things happening close to home and far away. We also see examples of courage, compassion, strength, adaptability, and resilience. Use your creative talent to express your experiences and reactions to this year's events. So what I'm really looking for is for students to find their own way of expressing their feelings about this year. And students often ask me, well, who's the juror, so that I can look and see what their work is like. And when I pick a juror for the student shows, I'm not wanting students to imitate what someone else is doing. So I look for a juror who will look at the technical quality of the work, certainly, but who is open to allowing students to have their own perspective and their own take. So really, it's more about how does your image convey the story you're trying to tell. And so that's really the focus that I hope students will take with this. In addition to that, Viewpoint is still continuing to do some on-site workshops, and we have a scholarship program for students. So anyone who is interested in that can go online to Viewpoint. And Nick, do we have a way of putting up the Viewpoint website address and my email address?
Sure, I can just drop it in the chat.
Okay, that'd be great. That'd be perfect. So you can find out more about that through that method. And then any questions, you can just email me and I'll be happy to answer your questions for you. So, and then Doug, I think you're up for November doing the same thing. We'll try another Zoom when you have a show at Axis. So this is an experiment. So hi, Doug. And if you are up for doing that, I'm going to be very excited. And that will be Thursday, November the 19th at this same time of day. And I don't have anyone lined up for October 15th yet. I may be able to do that. I wanted, first of all, to see how this is really going to work and what kind of level of interest we have in it. So it looks like we've got a good turnout, so I will be working to find someone. If anyone knows someone who would like to speak on a subject related to photography in October, give me, I was gonna say give me a call, but just give me an email and then we can chat about it. So with that, I want to turn back to Nick. I think most of you know Nick, so I don't know that he really needs much introduction. He grew up in New York City. There's his sister who's still in New York City. He earned his MFA in photography from the School of Visual Arts, studying under Sarah Charlesworth. In addition, he's had shows at Axis, which is the show you're going to be seeing, and also he's had his work at the Crocker and other art centers in the Sacramento area and elsewhere. He's based now in Sacramento. He teaches at CSUS, and I don't know, do you still have your studio over in the Oak Park area?
Yep,
yeah.
Yep,
yeah.
2nd Avenue, and we had a group.
Where I met Nick on one of the open studio days.
Yeah, last year. And we had a great student show there last fall. Some of the students who are on this participated in that, and we were gearing up to have a show there last spring for the students. But you know, so it goes.
Well, we just keep finding ways to make things work or work around what we can't do. So at any rate, at this point, I want to turn this over to Nick, who's going to talk about his exhibit Reflection that's at the Access Gallery right now. So Nick, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Let me make sure that I'm getting this. Thought I had it queued up in the right spot. Okay, let's try this way. Just before I get going, I'll just mention that the chat, I'll have the chat hidden during this for myself, but for others, you can use the chat to sort of put in some questions, or you can hold questions for the end and either use we'll see if we can use the participants panel or maybe just like the thumbs up. Haven't quite sussed that out. I think you can also actually raise your hand if you've got your video on, but please do use the chat if you want for questions. That's really a huge part of this, is hearing from you, after you've heard from me a little bit. Okay, so with that, I'm going to mostly hide my video here. Okay. All right, thank you, Diana, for having me, for Viewpoint for having me. This is definitely the first time I've done something like this, so this is pretty fun. I currently have a show up called Reflection at Access Gallery right now, down in Verge at 6th and S, 7th and S, I guess. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the images in the show, the process that I took to sort of get to this show, which is quite different from recent shows that I've had, and how I sort of ended up working on the installation and maybe where things are heading from here. So I do want to, might need to just change one setting. There we go. I do want to start by just giving you a little bit of a tour of the gallery space. So this is a few minutes long. It's silent, but it will just give you a sense of what this show, how this show looks if you haven't seen it in person. just talk over these last few minutes. Typically, we have our main show and access in the other room where Manuel Rios, who teaches at Woodland Community College, has his show, and I absolutely encourage you to check it out. We have shows in that main space and then split the smaller space that I have my show in. But because of COVID, we needed to change around our schedule a little bit. And also just thinking about sort of how we use the gallery. Axis is a co-op gallery. We've decided to make the East Gallery, where I have my show, into sort of more of a showcase space. So Jake Seltzer, you saw on the wall that the show is not just mine, but that it's also with Jake Seltzer. So who is Jake? Jake is a writer, poet based in Oakland. Like me, he's an educator, though he teaches at the high school level. But probably more importantly, Jake and I grew up together in New York City. And I don't know, I think we met when we were 6 or something like that. So we've like grown up playing baseball together and going to school together. Our families are really close. And maybe like you, when quarantine started, when COVID hit, I certainly felt a sense of mourning for things that I wasn't able to do anymore, people I wasn't able to see. And Jake and I have certainly, been in touch. He just lives down the road. So we've been talking about doing some kind of collaboration. And in the past, we've done different things as well. But I was starting to think about work that I could maybe make in response to this moment. And I was working with some students, some of whom are on this call at this lecture, I guess, on a pop-up zine stand. We had planned this for UCreate, which happens to Verge. And because of COVID, we weren't going to be able to do that. And we said, well, we're going to go forward with it anyway. And so I was thinking a lot about the things that I missed. And one of the things for sure that I missed during COVID was these sort of rites like graduation. So this is at Jake's graduation from college back in 2007. And here's a picture from the project that I made with that image as source material. So much of this project has to do with the idea of the way that we see images and that we are really reliant on images. You are looking at your screen right now. Look at me talking to you about pictures that maybe you've only seen on a screen. But because of quarantine, because of COVID, we were drawn more and more inwards into looking at Instagram, sharing things with our friends, connecting on Zoom rather than in person. So I wanted to pick up this idea of sort of the screen, the mediation of the image, the way we sort of don't connect with these things, actually connecting. We're not actually connecting with them. We're connecting through some sort of screen. So this image here, you can see the keyboard of the computer is what's in focus. And so I'm trying to kind of play with what you're seeing. Right? We look at pictures and we look through the picture to the subject matter of the picture. And I certainly see that subject matter. And maybe if you just came to this image without having seen the previous one, you would know, okay, here are two friends at some sort of event. Without the sort of things in focus, without the sort of celebration, without that being quite as visible, you're more aware, I hope, of the ways that we look at this picture. So as I was starting to think about this project and working with Jake, the first question that I asked him was, what are some places or things or people that you really miss, that you can't do because we have to stay home because of COVID. And the first thing that he said, just like right immediately, was, I miss hooping. I miss going to pick up basketball. I miss having that exercise, that energy. And I sort of followed up and asked him where he plays and things like that, because I was thinking, how can I kind of capture this? So I found a video, I don't know, of a game at the high school where he plays or something like that, some video of that space, and put it up on one of the screens that I have and photographed it. So here you can see I tried to include the fingerprints, the smudges that you see on the screen. Those aren't just smudges on your screen or on my screen, but they're actually in the photo, to call attention to the surface of the image. And also I've cropped in quite closely. I had the camera really quite close to the screen to try to pull out the pixelation that the screen provides as well. So if Jake looks at this picture, he would say, yeah, that's that gym that I go to. And that really brings that back for me. To me, it's more about this ball that's neither in the basket nor out of the basket. Things are kind of in between. And of course, it calls to mind, again, that sort of nostalgic feeling of like going to high school basketball games or these kinds of moments. One thing that I really missed, and maybe you really miss as well, was just gathering with people, gathering with my friends. So I took an image that I had made back last May of a dinner that I had with some friends, and I put that also on a screen and photographed it. This time, I wasn't trying to highlight the smudges necessarily on the surface, but I was using focus and the kind of like the way that we use bokeh to make things feel so, beautiful and pristine. So I kind of took that technique, but I used it to blur out the real sort of subject matter of the image. You don't look at this and look through and see these people. Instead, you look and you see people kind of gathering together, and perhaps you sort of put yourself into that kind of experience. But it's meant to be bucolic, this kind of image. Certainly meant to be bucolic. You can see just slight hints here of reflections that I added by setting up a light. One thing that I do in the spring at school is I teach studio lighting, and we always talk about the angle of incidence and different kinds of reflections. So if nothing else, that was certainly on my mind when I was making this picture, but probably not the way my students maybe are laughing at this right now, not the way that I would normally use that in class. Another thing that I found myself missing was being able to travel, being able to go home to New York. We didn't get to go home over Christmas, so I haven't been back east since been over a year now. And I was going through old photos of mine, again, kind of as a nostalgia trip, and also trying to think of sort of source material for this. And I found this photo that I took just as the sun is about to rise after flying, I'm flying into New York. So here you're seeing Long Island as I'm flying in from the West Coast. Like the other pictures, this is photographed on a screen, so I've been able to play with the perspective. And here, kind of like that last picture where I had the reflection of the light in the screen, in that device, here I got it almost so it looked like it was like in the photo. So I thought this would be kind of an interesting picture to think about, like, how do you select a picture, like this, and just to give you a little bit of insight into sort of how this picture came about. So on the left, is one of the first pictures I made when I was working with this object. So just some things to point out. You can see this was shot on a surface and kind of at that angle. And in the first image, I didn't have any kind of reflection there, and it just didn't feel like it was done. It needed something else. So then I set up an umbrella in the family of angles so it would cause this really bright reflection here, but it just felt like too much. You know, instead of being part of the image or making you aware of the surface, it just seemed like it took over the whole picture. But I did quite like these sort of like ribs that come out, the ribs in the umbrella. So I rearranged the umbrella again to have different kinds of reflections. And then in this one, I was quite happy with this, the way these reflections sort of like come out of the ground almost. And in this next one here, 4297, you can see that I was still sort of following that idea of the lights sort of emerging from the ground. I don't know, like something you would see. What is that? The Universal Studios intro screen where the light sort of comes from the earth. Anyway, I was interested in these reflections, and you can see I made more pictures in between here as well. Then I got these all imported into the computer, and I was looking at them again, and it just felt like 4292 was the one that really needed to be the picture. It had that idea of those lights being something supernatural. Like, wait a minute, is this in that picture? Is this some natural phenomenon? Is it not? And there's some kind of mystery there. So just as a picture, it felt to me that this one was working better even than the ones that I had done after. And having those ones after helped me understand that I had sort of gotten it here. And I'll just point out, this is uncropped. So in the final image for the show, I cropped this down here and up there. To me, having that sort of like the text on the bottom and these symbols made it too much just about like whatever operating system you were using. So I kind of wanted to keep the cards a little closer to the vest. Earlier on, I mentioned that I started making this work as a part of a zine that I was making in collaboration with some students. So the zine that I made was called Recontact. And the reason that we chose that title was, to me, it was this particular zine was like about this sort of email text conversation that Jake and I had where I sent him images and he wrote poems, and then sort of back and forth like that. Really, mostly in this case, I started the conversation by sending the images, or, you know, asking him for ideas, but then sending images, hearing back, and sort of working with the poems that he had made kind of in response to the images. So this is about, if you were holding this, this would be about a letter size sheet of paper. So it's just folded in half. And I had this printed on MagCloud. I know some other students in the group used Mixam, M-I-X-A-M, and both are really good resources for zines. I'm happy to answer questions about that later too. So I'll show you a few more images from this zine. Because we couldn't do the zine pop-up in person, Cameron Getty, who's on here, created a website for us to kind of have as a virtual home for these zines, and you can look at this one as well as the other zines that the students made. So Cameron, maybe you can drop that link in the chat so other folks can check it out later. So one thing that I'll talk about here is that I sort of try to find different homes for my pictures. Of course, I said before that, you know, you're seeing me talking to you through a screen. And I think we look at pictures all the time on our phones as well. I think exhibitions are a great way to see pictures. They do something different than what you can do on the screen. But I also understand that it's hard to get people to exhibitions. You know, maybe you're not free, or maybe it's far, or they're not open when it's convenient, or you just forget and then the show closes. That's happened to me. So this was really the first iteration of this work. And you'll see maybe some pictures in here that you didn't see in the show. But this was also an important way for me to try to link the text and the images kind of explicitly together. I got into photography early on because my dad said, "Hey, Nick, I bet photography would be a good asset for you to go along with your interest in graphic design." And I've still maintained that interest in design over the years, even though it's not something I studied formally in college, but I still love having the opportunity to work with texts and books, and that's really important to me. I'll show some more of that later. So these photos of this zine give you a sense of the different ways that I was experimenting with linking the text and the pictures together. So in this one, it is actually a diagonal left margin there. So the poem does kind of go along with that line in the image. And I was also able to sort of highlight control with that. So the pictures and the text sort of work together in these different ways. Here's one from the NYC subway. So this zine really represents, for me, or the genesis of this zine really was this feeling of disconnection from things in general, and also just the sort of nostalgia that brought up for me, or a feeling of certainly of loss, and like I found myself wishing that I could visit places and things and people that I haven't seen in a while. Not that I necessarily would have seen them this summer, but it was like, well, now I can't. And now I'm thinking about how all of these things that feel so unattainable. So like this is a thunderstorm in North Carolina. And then here's that picture again. This is the last image in the zine. And I use the dark page, the black page on the right side, along with the yellow text to have them play off each other in these different ways. And I also, of course, played with the visual of the text throughout this to sort of try to highlight at least the way that I was reading the poems, as well as to try to have some kind of visual correspondence between the text and the imagery, which isn't always that easy to do. I think it's also
from up high, the light still shines.
Here's a reading of this poem from Jake, and I have one more that I'll go back to that I accidentally skipped.
From up high, the lights still shine at night. At the right height, you can count the baseball fields and pools. I wonder if Miss Baker and Abel did that. Can you imagine being a monkey in space? Not the jungle, not the zoo, not this planet. Shit, not even the fake Tiger King zoo. Miss Baker lived 20 more years. I wonder what echoed. Anything? Was it all just the same? Show us the way, Miss Baker, when we come back to Earth.
And I accidentally missed one before as well, so I'm going to go back to that one. This is the rush hour.
We were dancing around the ring of the bagel, not realizing we could fall in. The emptiness that makes the bagel whole. Jewish Tao Te Ching. Dashing between poppy, sesame, and salt. We had everything. And we had the whole too. Too pure to commodify. You ever seen a bagel hole? You better not, Dunkin' Donuts. We're in the whole of the whole now. No W's. Not taking L's either. Essential workers only. Do 4 walls make a house? Does a train car make a subway? Do rimless hoops make a park? And yet, there's still the whole. There's a lot there. It's different though.
So that's Jake reading those 2 poems, and we'll hear a little bit more from him later too. So keep going here.
From up high, the light.
So I also wanted to give you just a little context. This is not the first time I've sort of done a zine. As I said, I'm quite interested in book design and graphic design and the ways that I can incorporate images into different media, I guess I would say, and into ways that I can get you to encounter my pictures wherever you encounter them. So this is a newspaper-sized zine catalog that I made for the show that I had at Access in the main gallery back in 2018. And I had, there's an essay from Justina Martino as well as the list of the images. So I think similarly to the most recent one, I used the sort of graphic quality of the text as well as the text itself to really play off some things that I was doing in the pictures. You know, we had that angular text back in the zine, and here's another example. So for this show, I included both the images as well as photos of the exhibition, because I'm really interested in exhibitions and kind of what you can do, and trying to find ways to bring that into your experience of the pictures. As I was designing this, and I was working with Maggie, my wife, on doing this, and we came up with the idea of having all of the images themselves, so like the picture on the right, all of those images were going to be on like the upward facing side of the page, and then all of the installation views were going to be on the downward side facing downward side, because then when you took it apart, you could look at pictures next to each other and sort of have an installation at home, I suppose. Again, I'm trying to find ways to get you to look at my pictures like maybe together or differently than you would just on my website or something like that. So here is an installation view of those pictures, and the wall on the left side is a volume that I built for the show. The way that you can in exhibitions sort of use walls or use the way you hang pictures to ask viewers to sort of think about pictures together or in opposition, or to ask them to remember things, that's really important to me. And so here's an example of an installation that I had at Access previously. This work is, I would say, closer to the work that I've done before this most recent show. So coming back to this show, here's installation view from Reflection. And I didn't want to build any walls or anything like that, but this time I chose just to use prints on the wall, and they're hung up there with very small sort of nail, like, I don't know, inch-long tacks, basically, not thumbtacks, but inch-long tacks. And in some cases, I've let, like here, I've let the bottom of the print hang off the bottom. to pick up more reflections from the surrounding space. And I've never done this before, but I chose to use glossy paper to pick up more reflections from the fluorescent lights and from you. The other day, a student stopped by the gallery and he noticed that his shadow was cast onto this image when the light came in through the door that's kind of behind us. So it's really fun to see him playing with that and like really picking up on that idea without me sort of saying anything. It was a real challenge to think about how to work with text in this case, because I didn't want to just recreate the zine. It sort of needed to be its own thing. And the advantage of being in the next exhibition space is that I could play with the size of the prints. I could play with the size of the poems and how they kind of related to each other. So here I have this high gloss print of First Lights. Oh, and for students, if you don't know about the Elko poster special, you should look that up. ELCO. So this is an Elko digital C print. Most of the other ones are just inkjet prints, but to get the bigger ones, since I don't have access to the larger printer at Sac State, I went with Elko. And then the poem itself is printed on a matte paper and then just stuck to the wall. So there's this different sort of visual language between the the tack pinned into the photo versus the text, which is sort of smoother into the wall, but still a different color, a different texture. And I did try to bring some of my favorite ideas from the zine into the show. So here it's a little hard to tell, but this paper is cut on the diagonal right there. So it's sort of like a diagonal column that's coming up from behind the photo. And again, same thing in the matte for the text and the high gloss for the photo. One major change from the zine was that in this case, I added some images. It wasn't just a continuation. I wanted to keep working with the ideas. And so one real change was that Jake sent me poems that I then responded to with images. In the zine, it was really mostly my images that he responded to. But here I asked him to keep sending me ideas, and we were exchanging ideas about what we were thinking about. And so he sent me this poem, which I think is really just lovely. So I made a picture in response to this. But still, as I was printing it, I wanted to think about the text and different ways it could relate to the image. So in this case, it's the matte sheet of paper. And then on top of that is about a 10 by 17 glossy print that's tacked in. Another major change from the spring is that as COVID continued, life clearly continued to happen. There have been major protests throughout the country. I mean, just the other day, just yesterday, Breonna Taylor's murderers were not charged. So these things are very much on the mind. And so I wanted to try to find a way to bring these things that were happening not through the screen, maybe we were experiencing them through the screen, but to bring those things into the show as well. Just to acknowledge that they are a part of this experience that we're having of COVID. So here's an image of the Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond, reflected on top of a photo that I took at the Women's March in Washington back in 2017. And you can really see the iPad there. So that these things are not the same by any means, but that there is a sense of an echo going on. Another thing that I think many of us have done during quarantine or during COVID is watched a lot of TV. So one of the early shows that we watched was Babylon Berlin, and this takes place in the Weimar Republic. And in the show, there's a scene of, essentially a conflict between the police and some communists. And the main character is a detective, so he's sort of caught in the middle of this. So another interest of mine here, right, trying to capture the screen as well as sort of this an evocation of the subject matter. Here I could use the frames that pop up on the screen with a long exposure to create this feeling of motion, and as a way to get at this feeling of unrest throughout the country without needing to photograph like a photojournalist's image necessarily of the protests. One image that I made this is a piece that I made in response to this long poem that Jake sent me, and there's a line in there where he talks about the look on Serena's face after she crip walked at Wimbledon. And so I went and I found the video, and it's from just after she won the Olympics at Wimbledon in London. And I love the line from the poem as well, but it's so sort of telling to me, this incredibly athletic Black woman who won what has traditionally been thought of as a white person's game in sort of this bastion of European culture, Wimbledon. And here she brought in this, perhaps controversial element of her life, of her culture. And she didn't quite know how to feel about that. But in the show, this is quite near to that Black and Blue piece that we just saw. Just to, again, call attention to the kind of tension between these things. I wanted to talk a little bit about how I chose to arrange the text too. So the image on the left here is sort of my first try of okay, well, what do I do with this really long poem? Put it up. I wasn't really that happy with it. But because I don't have any rolls of paper in my studio, I was printing everything on sheets. I had to split it up into essentially 3 columns to make it fit. And so then trying to rearrange them to move it, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, that kind of works. That has a nice visual flow. And then also once I started thinking about the other images that were going to go near it, this sort of flow that it had along the wall really felt to me like it worked well. Here's another installation view. I sort of like the idea with this one of the poem almost looking like wall text that you would see at a museum. This is like one of the first things that you see when you come into the show and you sort of don't know what to expect. So I like that idea that you go and you look for explanatory text, and what you see instead is a poem. I wanted the show to end. So right now you enter Access through Verge, and then you go through Manuel Rios's show. Then you come into my show and you exit through what has sort of traditionally been the front door at Access. And I wanted the show to end on some sort of positive note, since it's been just such a hard time. So this piece and then the next piece that you'll see are sort of the last images. They're more bucolic. They call to mind these sort of great American pastimes and gathering with each other. but still there's that sense of the surface of something that's mediated. The one on the right is called In the Ballpark. The one on the left, We Sat Together Under the Canopy, which you saw before. And Jake wrote a poem that I just loved. And I sort of didn't have a picture for it. So as I was working on the show, the sort of final stages, it was like, this poem has to be in the show, and I need to find imagery that I think can work with this. So these are actually, I think, some outtakes that I had previously discarded from that Under the Canopy image or a similar image, thinking, oh, it's too much about the fingerprints. It's not about that idea of togetherness. But the poem talks about these things that are kind of larger than us. And I love the way that the light and the fingerprints and that just that little hint of the sunset was really something quite uplifting. So, of course, this doesn't end here. You know, I've made now a zine and I've made an exhibition with this work, and I'm always trying to think about different ways to share the work. You heard some recordings of Jake's. So one thing that I've started to do, and certainly don't feel like I've resolved, is to create some videos that include my images as well as his readings. So I want to play one for you and just let you know that there's some non-child language in this. So if you have kids in earshot, just, you know, maybe earmuff or mute for a second.
Social distance block party. 6 feet apart. Strictest and oldest middle school dance I can remember. DJ spinning Touch, Daft Punk. This motherfucker. Shit. Next song should be Don't Kill My Vibe, I Want to Whisper to My Guy. But how I'm going to whisper from 6 feet away? Touch, I remember touch. Pictures came with touch. All these hugs, kisses, and tags in the cloud. Less clutter. We'll touch again soon. Touching screens and swiping right. The convenience of online shopping.
Touch, where do you lead? I need something more.
So with that, I will stop my share and would love to hear questions or thoughts that you have. Thank you for being here.
So Nick, first of all, I want to thank you. This was really wonderful. I loved the work. I loved the ideas that you and Jake came up with and the way in which you're sharing them, not only through the show, but with zine. I didn't know about that, so I definitely will check that out. And, you know, I feel like one of the things that's happening that I see around me, because we're not able to be together, we're still finding new ways to communicate and relate. And our neighbor across the street is a concert pianist. She does concerts for us, 30-minute concerts every once in a while. She'll just send out an email, people come stand or sit outside on the lawn. But she's also working with musical artists across the country, doing special things and posting. So I just see all kinds of creativity everywhere I look, and this is certainly an example of that. So
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see, I'm not sure what the best way is to take questions. I certainly was not following the chat as I was talking, so I don't know if there are any questions that would be good.
What I would suggest is, if you want to say something, I really like hearing people speak. So if you just stick your hand up, then Nick can unmute you and then you can talk. So can we give that a try? Will someone do
Yeah,
that?
sounds
I see
good.
yes, nodding, yes.
Pete has a question. Angel has a question. I'm going to throw it to Angel first and then Pete.
Okay, I mean, I have just a very simple question because I think this whole, I think poetry and photography go well together if put nicely, and that's something that I wanted to try to do in like my personal kind of work, but I never like had a chance to find the photos that correlated with a poem or a poem that correlated with photos, so I would have to write one to create the other, or vice versa, or just by simple like inspiration, like words just throw out at me when I see it. But I was just curious if you and Jake had like any future things lined up, because that's something that's very interesting to me.
It's a great question. I'm not sure. I don't know if we're done. I'm not sure. I think we might keep working on this. We'll kind of see. I know that he has other ideas for collaborations that we can do that have a different aesthetic or a different kind of project. Early in the summer, he really wanted us to work on a project inspired by the Kerner report together. And it felt so huge to kind of take that on. So I think if we want to do that, it might take a little bit more planning to see what that'll be. So we'll see. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Thank you. Pete, there we go.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was something absolutely particular about COVID times and pandemic that lent itself absolutely to this marriage of image and text. You know, did you either think that photography on its own was inadequate, or did you think the emotions that text allowed was the obvious choice?
I think,
and could you have talked about COVID without Jake or without another collaborator's input of text and poetry?
I think I definitely could have. I think maybe it was, I think probably this particular collaboration simply came about because we were just reconnecting, because it was like, man, this is so crazy. You know, it's like, not that we've been out of touch, but there's so much going on in both of our lives. He has a 2-year-old, you know, school is happening. So I think COVID was a bit of a catalyst just to get us to start thinking about it. And then once that idea was happening, and I knew that I was wanting to collaborate with students on this zine pop-up, it was like, man, this is a great opportunity. In some ways, low risk, like great opportunity to try out something new for the zine. And then I was really happy with the way it turned out. And I was thinking about the show coming up in September, and it was like, well, I think we could expand this and sort of build it out. So could I have made work just only image based? I think I definitely could have. I think also, just to the first question about like how do text and image work together, particularly in COVID. I mean, you know, Twitter, Instagram, it's like here you are. It's like just the way that we pull in the world now, that seems so, it feels so, not that didn't exist before, but it just feels so kind of relevant to the time. So I'm not sure if that's the insightful answer that I wish I gave, but I think that's the truthful answer. I don't know, are there any other hands out there? Yes. Rebecca, you still have to, I think you have to unmute on the screen there. Should have, there we go. Yep, you got it. Great.
Well, I'm very happy that I was able to meet you this way. I had seen a previous show that you did that you alluded to, but missed seeing you in that show. So I'm very happy to hear you talk so in depth about your work. And I think the thing that impresses me is not only that I star some little tributary ideas from it, but just the import of the ideas that go into, I think so often when we're looking at images, we don't look behind them very much. And so it is sort of that surface thing we don't, which is even the name of the machine you were alluding to. And it's so often that we don't even know the name of the photographer or the place, or, you know, even just the bare bones of things. And so I'm really just want to compliment you and tell you how enjoyable it was to hear you talk about the process. And as a bad poet myself, I'm also liking the collegiality, you know, the intertwining of those two words and pictures together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. One thing that for some of the poems, especially the more recent ones, there were some that were very clearly poems, and it was like, okay, this is a poem. And then there were some where I followed up with Jake and said, are these like, is this 20 poems or is this a 20 stanza poem? Like, what should it be? And he very generously, at least with some of them, said, you know, yes. So in some situations, especially for the show, I pulled out some of those sort of discontinuous stanzas to make them kind of work together. And I should also just say that, like with the last video that I showed, Jake really wanted that feeling of like I mean, he sent me the recordings, and when he sent me that recording, I was surprised to hear the recording of Daft Punk's song that he's talking about in the poem. Because whenever I read it, I just sort of just heard it in my own head, and then he had played it. So he wanted to really, for him, that was really about the way music touches him. And he wanted the sound of like the vinyl and the way that you touch the record, almost literally. To me, his poem was not about music in that way. It was about all these other things, right? So that's been something that's been interesting as well as we've moved into the video, the way that his input on the idea of kind of, okay, well, how should these go? It's not like the exhibition space that's like my territory. Now it's like, okay, now we're talking about video and music and how these things can kind of intertwine. So I think the collaboration can continue to evolve.
Yeah,
So.
it's exciting.
Let's see, what was my thought process in determining the size of the photos in the gallery? That's a good question. Let's see, I certainly started by trying to print the images in my studio and put them up and see how they felt at different scales. That's something that, to me, the exhibitions, that's so important to have exhibitions, because you can see a picture this big or this big, and that's a different experience. On the phone, everything's the same scale. So I certainly started just by trying things out, and some pictures felt like they should be small or should be big. And then the two pictures that I printed larger, so from Elko, were the one of the first lights, and then also the one of the iPad that's, you know, of the Robert E. Lee statue and the Women's March. And those pictures just felt like they needed to be a little bit more monumental than what I could do in my studio. So the biggest I can print in the studio is 17 by 22, or 17 and longer, but really 17 by 22. So just putting the work up in my studio, and it was like, oh, this has to be a little bit bigger. So what I did for those is I would split it up into 2 sheets and then pin them up next to each other to try to get a sense. Just to give you a very bad example, if these were 17 by 22s, I'd print half here and half here, and then just pin them up together so I could see it at that scale, to then be able to decide how big to order the print from Elko. And yeah, I think the other element with the sizes of the prints is if I can vary the scales of the prints, I can get you, the visitor, to move physically forward to look at something that's small, or to have to back up because you don't want to have to look at a print that's this big from this close away. So I can kind of dictate a little bit of how you move around the gallery space, and that's pretty exciting to me. David, yes. Go for it. There we go.
Have you thought about, thanks, by the way, for inviting. Have you thought about maybe doing a print or printing it on like a surface like Mylar so there's more of a reflection?
I didn't think about Mylar specifically. I think that would be cool. Like one of the last days before the show went up, Maggie and I were joking and we were saying, well, shouldn't we have just gotten like metallic paper? The students would have been so excited about it, you know, super sexy. But I don't know, it didn't feel quite right. So, I mean, I think maybe Mylar would be cool, but then also you have perhaps the translucency of it. And that's just not something that it's not that something that I shouldn't have considered. It's just something that I didn't think about. One thing that I would like to have tried and just kind of couldn't make it work was something more like, so the prints, the poem prints that we put up on the matte paper, they're just essentially double stick taped at the top and the bottom. And over the month that they've been up, the paper has started to bow as it's kind of stretched out. So I wish that I could have done something with more like a vinyl that would have been really beautifully adhered to the wall, but I just didn't have the resources to make that happen. But that's an interesting question about the Mylar, David.
So you're allowed to have guests over at the studio. People can go in and view the images, or?
You can make an appointment to see the show at the gallery. And this is the last weekend that it's up, and that's just here. Now the chat is back up. I will put it in the chat.
Cool.
And I saw Manuel is here as well, and his show is up, so you'll get to check that out as well. Really, like, talk about scale, really huge, really graphic paintings, which are really interesting.
Tell Doug to give you one of the, what's that one that we used?
Doug, give me one of the things that we used.
One of the printers. Come on. If they're not in use.
The problem also, David, was right. The mail is not necessarily moving that quickly, and sometimes it's just like hard to get those materials in a timely fashion.
Yeah, a lot of the images that you showed kind of remind me of the installations that we saw at that SPE over in Santa Clara that we went to last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So any students who don't know about the Society for Photographic Education, I definitely want to just mention it to you as a really cool resource. And I'll actually be giving a talk with Jake on Saturday about this work as a part of the conference that the SPE Northwest chapter is organizing. So if you're a member, if you're interested in joining SPE, they've made it pretty affordable to attend the conferences for members. It's $20 for a student for a year, which is crazy. Okay, Cameron has a question. what initially made me want to photograph a photograph rather than just manipulating the source image? That's like a harder question than it seems like it should be. To me, it's just about the surface of the screen and the way that we just look right through it. You know, and if I manipulate an image in Photoshop, which I do a lot of, then it's just about the manipulated image, or it could be just about the manipulated image. I mean, in some ways, this project started out as a very simplistic thing. I wanted to photograph things that I missed in a way that showed whoever was looking at the photograph that I was looking at that thing through a screen. That was the best connection that I could have to that place or person or idea. So the screen just had to be a part of it. To me, the fact that I was teaching on Zoom, the fact that I was, you know, glued to the news, and all of these things were on a screen. So kind of like my answer to Pete, I feel like it's a simpler answer than I would want it to be. But I'd like to think anyway that I what discovered as I experimented with screens, right, like TV, phones, tablets, and lighting, and so on, was that I could create an effect so it didn't just like look like the same thing, kind of one-to-one. Thank you, Manuel. Do I have some images where I include the border of the screen? I think that's kind of the only one that I really did that. Oh, that's not true. Go back into Keynote here. I did have that one early on that I'll bring back up. This image where I included the sort of edges of the device. But, you know, I didn't want to, like, I wanted to I wanted to acknowledge the screen, but not necessarily the particular devices that they were on quite as much, because otherwise it was like, I don't know, it felt too much like a phone ad, or like, this is about my phone, as opposed to just the sort of broader kind of mediation. And I think also, like, that piece I didn't put in the show because I couldn't figure out the right way to do it. Whereas with the zine, I could like have a gradient that covered up half of the image and it would just blend into the page. And I didn't really know how to do that in the show because you have a print or you don't have a print. You can't like easily blend it unless you're painting. David, cutting deep. Have I thought about journaling what I feel? Oh boy, that's an amazing idea. You should do that. That's an incredible idea. That's not a Nick idea. That's an amazing David idea. About text and image. Pete, I would love that. I would love a crowdsourced lecture. I saw an incredible, the keynote or one of the featured speeches, one of the featured sessions at the SPE in Philadelphia back in 2018 was a professor sitting with 3 of his students and essentially just interviewing his students about their work and just saying, here's this picture. Like, what were you thinking about where you made this picture? And it was such an engaging talk because the students could really speak openly about what they were thinking about. And the professor could say, what was it like to hear from other students about this work? I was thinking. So it was very freeform, but super, super, super insightful.
So with the show at the Crocker, what I've done, both times we've had it there, and I've also tried to carry that forward to our student show when we have it at the Viewpoint Gallery, is to have students write 1 or 2 sentences that expresses what they were thinking about their image. And I find that really enhances a show, particularly when you're showing the work of so many different people, because there's no opportunity. If you're a single artist, or we have 2 artists, there's an artist statement that goes up. But when you have 61 students in a show, you can't do that. And when I walk through and look at the images with the words that the students are expressing about their image, it really enhances, for me and for other people that I know who've experienced this, what that's about. So I think it's a great idea to combine the image and the text.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that I've definitely struggled with is, like, if you sit down to write something, it's got to be really clear and well written. And that certainly helps me clarify things. Sometimes there's something nice about the informality of just saying, so tell me about this picture, the way you do in critique. So being able to try to find a way to kind of do both of those is I don't know, a goal in some way. I'm going to just paste this is the event that I was just mentioning at SBE. Okay, am I seeing anything else? I think I've got all the questions in the chat. You can, of course, keep adding things there as well.
So I have a question for you. I know you're recording this, which I think is great. And will we be able to put that up as a YouTube and make it available so that I could send that YouTube link out to all the faculty on all the campuses, as well as put it in an e-blast?
Yep, for sure. Yeah, sorry, I just...
Great. Yeah, no, I'd love to.
I was underfoot and was startled when I moved. Yes, for sure.
Great.
Well, shall we? What's next? I don't know.
Well,
Doug in November. Oh, what's next for me? Who knows? I have a show coming up in Access in June, and I would love to collaborate with those of you who are interested in that. Pete, I'm not sure if you're sarcastically suggesting daguerreotypes, or that that I had a plan to have a show of daguerreotypes that didn't happen because I was scheduled this summer to go to so actually my plan for this show that I just gave a talk about was to have a show of daguerreotypes, which is of course the exact opposite of the kind of work that I showed you at the previous show. Right? Tiny, precious, reflective. But I was planning to go to a summer workshop at the Photographer's Formulary with Jerry Spagnoli to do daguerreotypes, because I wanted to bring the surface. I still wanted to bring the surface of the object in, and the way in like the previous shows, the way that I've dealt with the physicality of the print was by making them big, putting them in ash frames, and then they're very matte. So there's not the sort of typical plexiglass reflection. So I wanted to push kind of the opposite direction and make more contemporary images with the daguerreotype process. So you would still be brought into the object, but kind of in a different way. That, of course, was canceled early on because of COVID. It's still something I'd love to do. I think it would be really interesting to work with a historical process, not necessarily for the sort of delving into something historical, but to try to find a way to make it feel necessary and contemporary. It looks like there's some side chat going on here. I feel like I had a dream about this, I don't know, months ago, being on a Zoom with Angel and David. Maybe this was actually just our department picnic back in the spring. I know nothing about historical processes except that they're there. Maggie would definitely be the person to help you with historical processes, as she has said here. I just need to take a back seat to the chat because this is really something.
So for those of you who don't know Rebecca Gregg, she is one of the founding members of Viewpoint, and she is a recently retired instructor, I think more than 30 years of teaching at Sierra College, and has a huge knowledge of history and types of photography and stuff. She's been a wonderful resource for our organization, and she's one of the most supportive people for all students that I've ever known. So anyway, for those of you who don't know her, Rebecca.
Connections made.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
I feel like I just need to leave this meeting and allow everybody to just continue their kind of sideline chat here. If they're...
Thank you again, Nick, for doing this for us. This has been really great.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I want to thank all of you for your participation. It makes me know that we can do this. And you know, sometimes we've had a hard time having students make it all the way downtown to the gallery. So maybe we'll end up doing this as our regular program, even after we can be back together. I'm not sure about that, but
yeah,
it gives me a lot of support in thinking about how to use this mechanism going forward.
I think that's one thing that this time has allowed us, which is that we have to do things totally differently, and you know, maybe we can learn some different ideas.
So do we need to put Viewpoint's website and my email address back?
Yeah,
in?
I'll put it up again. It was up earlier. And what I'm going to do, everybody, since it seems like there's a critical mass that kind of wants to hang out, I'm just going to stop the recording in a minute, and then we can hang out and chat with each other, because that would be really, really fun. So let's see. Also, Diana, you can put it in the chat too.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. So I've got Viewpoint. And if anybody is here, there are a few names that I don't recognize.
I'll put my email address in for you. Let's see.
But if there's anybody who is interested in Sac State, I would love to connect with you about that. And Doug or Pete could also tell you about our program. I think we have something really great going on. So
I think everybody can see my email address now, as well as the Viewpoint website address.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. It's great.
Thank you so much.
See lots of new faces, as well as some faces that I recognize